In this video, I'm going to explain the difference between qualitative and quantitative data and include when to use it and some common misconceptions about them. So let's start by talking about qualitative data. Qualitative data is essentially your non-numerical data. It tells you about the qualities of something or the characteristics of something, but not specifically numerical data about it. So some examples of this include open-ended survey responses. So if you have a survey and you ask a question like, how did you feel about X? Then that would be considered qualitative data. Observations of color changes in a chemical reaction. So if you're more in the physical sciences and you say that this turned from clear to pink, then that would be qualitative data. Now, if you went and took measurements, if you did UV-vis spectroscopy of it before and after, and then recorded the absorbance, that would be quantitative data. And then descriptions of physical properties. If I say something is soft versus hard, that's qualitative data instead of quantitative data. Also, interviews. When you're interviewing another person, all of the information that they're giving you would also be considered qualitative data. And any general observations that you make, whether it's anthropological or any other types of physical observations that you make, would also be qualitative data. On the other hand, we have quantitative data, and simply said, quantitative data is our numerical data. And so some of these examples include something like measuring temperature. You can get a number. It's 98 degrees outside. You can get a number for what the temperature it is. Different concentrations. So if you had like the concentration of blood or the concentration of sodium or anything like that, that would be a specific number that you have. The size of something, so length or height or any of those things, that's a specific number. A rating scale response. So saying from 0 to 10, rate your pain, instead of saying describe your pain to me. That would be the difference between quantitative being the number or the qualitative being just describing it. And then even something like time. So if you're measuring the time that something took place or how long did it take to do something specific, that would be a specific number that you have, a specific unit that you're then able to use. So quantitative data has a few specific types of data that's important to know the difference between. So the first one is discrete. So this is countable or a factor. So essentially they each fall in nice clean segments. So for example, a rating scale of pain is 1 to 10. Now, in general, if you set this up on a survey and they had to fill in a bubble, right, from 0 to 10, there's no 7.5. There's no 7.25876, right? There's only 7 or 8 or 9. Now, if you're talking to someone, they may give you half steps, like 7 or 7.5. or a 7/8, which would be about a 7.5. So even that would be considered discrete, right? You're not able to use any number between a given range. And so this would also be for things that are counted, right? For number of people, for example, you have to count each individual person. There's not 1.5 people. So those would be discrete. And then you have continuous, and these are your measurable. They can be any option of number along a given scale. Now, we do have precision requirements. So for example, I can't measure weight in most scales at the 0.1000th pound or 0.1000th gram. That's precision measurements, but in theory, that weight could be anything, any number between the allowable numbers. So that would be a continuous metric. So then the key differences between quantitative and qualitative is essentially we're talking more about descriptive data with qualitative data versus numerical data that you can measure and you can run mathematical analyses on. And so some examples include that qualitative data is textual responses. So examples of this could include that qualitative data is more textual responses. So either an interview response or a response to a survey question, versus quantitative data is more numerical values. So either choosing a specific thing or measuring a specific parameter and getting that numerical number from it. For data collection methods, what you're going to find is qualitative data is going to come more from surveys or observations. So I'm including like interviews in with surveys, basically extracting information from people or observing specific things. Where quantitative data is going to come more from experiments that you run or collecting that kind of data and simulations. You can get quantitative data in surveys as well. It would be observational quantitative data. So that does exist as well. But if you're specifically measuring it, you tend to measure it in experiments or simulations. So let's talk about when to use these different types of data. For qualitative data, you want to use it whenever you're trying to gather information for hypothesis generation or idea generation. So let's say that I read open-ended survey responses, and I find that a lot of people say when they started eating broccoli, they felt less fatigued, something like that. That then allows me to generate a hypothesis that maybe eating broccoli helps you feel less fatigued. This is an example hypothesis. And so then I can go and collect quantitative data on fatigue scores after eating or not eating broccoli, something like that. But it helps give us a much broader range of information that especially we don't have to predetermine. So when we ask an open-ended question or we observe something that happens within a chemical reaction, we didn't have to predetermine how do we get that observation to occur. We just observe that it occurs, and then we can have a hypothesis that allows us to test why that might be occurring, or even if it is occurring more in the general population. Another way to use qualitative data is to help explain findings. And this is especially key when working with humans. In a lot of the work that I do, we find certain findings and we can have our theories of why it might be true. And what we can do is ask people, and when we take their qualitative responses and code them, we can actually see if our theories are true or if there's actually a different reason behind these two things being true. And then exploratory research. So this is similar to hypothesis generation, but just being able to get really broad data and explore it is one way to use qualitative data. On the other hand, quantitative data is going to be used more for hypothesis testing. So specifically I have the hypothesis that broccoli reduces feelings of fatigue. And so I need to test that. I need quantitative data of actually seeing a reduction in feelings of fatigue and then actually being able to see was it enough and with low enough variability that it's generalizable to the general population. Confirming results. So you may have gotten qualitative results that told you one thing, and then you run a quantitative data collection to test and confirm that that is actually what is happening. And then understanding the relationship between variables. And so someone can say something like eating broccoli, I feel like when I eat broccoli, it reduces my fatigue. We actually need quantitative data to show that that is actually what is occurring. And so both of these types of data are really helpful and really useful, but it's important to know when you use each type and not to use qualitative data to make statements that you can't make with qualitative data. So for example, if you have a sample size of 10 and you have a bunch of qualitative data of people saying the same thing, that doesn't mean that it's generalizable to the whole population. And so some common myths about mainly qualitative data is that quantitative data is always better than qualitative data. And this is actually something that I encounter in my job of people feeling like this is true or feeling like other people think it's true when they work with qualitative data. Quantitative data isn't better. It is used for specific things, and those things tend to be much more generalizable. Quantitative data tends to be more generalizable than qualitative data is. But that doesn't mean qualitative data doesn't have its place, and qualitative data often informs quantitative studies. And the other thing is that qualitative data is less scientific. Now, qualitative data is more subjective, and the processes that you use to analyze qualitative data are different than quantitative data, and there is some subjectivity within that as well. But it doesn't make it less scientific. It's still a scientific means of data collection and valid protocols for answering the type of questions that it makes sense for qualitative data to answer. So overall, that is the difference between quantitative data and qualitative data. If you like these videos and want to get early access to this Statistics for Scientists series, or you want to be able to download these slides as well, or you just want this content ad-free, I recommend checking out my Research Mastery Academy. It includes all of my research content in a searchable way, including my courses for research design, research writing, and dissertation writing. So all of that is in one place. I will leave the link below if you're interested in that. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one.